I remember standing in my kitchen, chopping vegetables I'd bought that morning. He was in the other room, tired, months of living out of a backpack. I hadn't asked what he wanted to eat. I hadn't even thought of a restaurant first. I just started cooking. And later I found myself wondering, why was that the thing I did? I think the answer lives inside a question Koreans ask all the time. 밥 먹었어? Have you eaten? Or more gently, are you eating properly these days? Koreans have asked me that more times in my life than they have asked, how are you? And for a long time, I didn't think that was strange. In the Korean life I knew, care often came disguised as something practical. Not every time, not from everyone, and never with exactly the same weight, but often enough that I learned, without being taught, to hear meal language as something more than a question about food. This is an essay about that, about a single word and the range of things it can quietly carry. The word is pop. If you translate it as rice, it becomes too narrow. If you translate it as meal, it becomes flatter than it feels. There's a more formal word for food and eating in Korean, 식사, the kind you'd use at work or in a situation that calls for a little distance. 식사 is careful and correct. Pop is what you say to someone you'd eat with in comfortable silence. One word holding all of that. And I think it makes sense because for most of Korean history, rice wasn't just a staple, it was the measure of a day. Whether your family had made it through, whether there was enough. If you had pop, you had survived another one. So when 밥 먹었어 became a greeting, it wasn't a strange leap. It was a direct line from that history into the present. Are you okay? Did today hold you? Is anyone looking after you? And over time, that question softened into reflex, into the most ordinary way of checking on someone without making a scene of it. Not how are you? 밥 먹었어? In my memory, pop was never only food. It was one of the easiest ways to ask a larger question while appearing to ask a very small one. What makes it interesting to me is that the same language can sit at very different places on a scale. Sometimes 밥 먹었어 is light, a passing question, a casual warmth that keeps the conversation human. Sometimes 밥 잘 챙겨 먹어, eat well, take care of yourself, is what you say at the end of a message when you mean more than goodbye, but don't want to sound dramatic about it, like a hand placed briefly on someone's shoulder before you leave. Sometimes, let's eat sometime, really does mean, I want to see you. I want to make time for this. I don't want this to become only distance. And sometimes, much more rarely, care stops being language and becomes something else, a plan, an effort, time set aside, a meal that didn't appear by accident. That range matters to me, because this isn't about saying that Koreans mention food and secretly mean love every time. That would be too simple and probably too neat. It's about how one small field of language can carry many different weights, from the lightest social warmth to something much more deliberate. Same word, very different gravity. I felt that very clearly when I was living abroad. I hadn't fully settled yet. Everything still felt slightly temporary. Even ordinary things took more effort than they should have. There was a Korean colleague there. She'd arrived before me, and she understood that first stretch without needing it explained. We found our footing with each other gradually, not the automatic closeness that sometimes happens between Koreans abroad, the kind that assumes connection before it's actually been built. Something more careful than that. She helped me in practical ways first. Tips, small things, the kind of help that makes a new place feel less unreadable. And then one evening, once we'd already figured out the shape of each other, she invited me over and made me dinner. Not as a grand gesture, not out of obligation, just, here, I made food, come eat. What stayed with me wasn't only the food itself. It was the feeling of being read correctly by someone who already understood the shape of that adjustment. She knew what she was offering. I knew what I was receiving. Nothing needed to be announced. Sometimes care doesn't arrive as a speech. Sometimes it arrives as a plate placed in front of you. And what struck me later, thinking back, was how little either of us said about what was actually happening. We just ate, and somehow that was enough. That is also why I still think about that afternoon in my own kitchen. My friend had been traveling alone for a long time. Enough quick meals, enough eating out, enough moving from place to place without really settling anywhere. We'd already caught up by then, already spent time together. There was nothing I needed to prove, nothing left undone. But on my day off, I found myself at the market anyway, picking out ingredients, planning something that would take time. I went home, put a pot on the stove, and began. I am not someone who makes a fuss over people. Reserved, maybe. Not someone who reaches out first, usually. Which is exactly why that afternoon stays with me. Because making a meal for someone isn't a neutral act. It sits high on the spectrum. Not a quick message. Not the easy warmth of let's eat sometime. Something heavier than that. What I wanted to give him wasn't only food. It was the feeling of a meal that someone had thought about before you arrived. The kind where you sit down and feel not like a guest passing through, but like someone who belongs somewhere, at least for an afternoon. That's chippap, not just home cooking. The cooking of a home that expected you. And maybe this is where the translation starts to fail. In English, have you eaten can sound unusually literal. Make sure you eat well can sound parental. Like concern that wasn't asked for, as if the other person can't manage their own life. But that's not what I hear in those phrases. Or not usually. What I hear is something closer to this. I hope you're not neglecting yourself. I hope your days aren't so full that you've stopped noticing your own hunger. I hope someone is looking after you, even a little. And that's also why let's eat sometime feels different to me from a polite, soft close. Sometimes it's light, yes. Sometimes it's just social habit. But more often, at least in the world I grew up in, the meal actually happened, and when it did, it mattered. One person paid this time, the other would next time. No one treated it like a transaction that had to be balanced immediately. It was a loose account of warmth carried across time between people who trusted each other to remember. I can only speak from inside the language I grew up in, but from inside it, this is what I know. Pop doesn't only describe something, pop carries the feeling itself. And in English, I can get close, but I can't quite get there. So when I think about pop now, I don't think of one meaning. I think of a whole range. At one end, a reflex, a text, a sentence so ordinary it almost disappears. Have you eaten? Eat well. Eat properly and stay healthy. A little further along, an invitation. Let's eat sometime. I'll get the next one. And at the far end, the thing that asks for effort. The market, the stove, the table, the time it takes to make care visible. Maybe that's the part that feels most Korean to me. Not because Korea can be explained through one word, and not because food was meaningful every single time it appeared, but because, in my experience, concern often moved sideways through practical language, through ordinary gestures, through the question that wasn't really about food. A person didn't always say, "I was worried about you." Sometimes they just asked if you'd eaten, and somehow, without it being announced, without it being named, that could be enough. I think that's why the word still feels bigger than its translation, because for me, pop doesn't only describe something, it carries the feeling itself. Nostalgia, warmth, jung, attention, the memory of being looked after, and the impulse to look after someone else. Not always dramatically, not always beautifully, often in very ordinary ways. In a message, at the end of a phone call, in the offer to pay for a meal, in the habit of asking the same small question again and again across years. Have you eaten? Are you eating properly these days? Eat well, stay healthy. Let's get a meal soon. The sentences are simple, but I don't think they ever felt simple to me. Underneath them, I could hear something else. Please don't wear yourself down too much. Please don't disappear into work or stress or loneliness. Please remember that your body is still yours to look after. Please let life include at least this much ordinary care. I don't know if all of that survives translation. Maybe some words can only fully land from inside the life that trained your ear to hear them. But this much, at least, I know. For most of my life, I thought "밥 먹었어?" was one of the most ordinary questions in Korean. Now, I think it may also have been one of the fullest. 밥 잘 챙겨 먹고. Eat well. Take care of yourself. Take care.